my model is Billy, and I've asked him to leave his hair long because we are filming another tutorial which requires a little bit more hair. So for today's look, I'm just going to use a wig cap to cover Billy's hair and hide it. And I'm going to leave it coming down the forehead because the prosthetic piece that we're going to be applying is going to adhere to this. I thought I'd show you my fun Halloween t-shirt. I'm going to be wearing a couple of them in tutorials. My partner Tommy and Billy both run a Handmaid's Good company on Etsy, so I will link it below for you because they do some amazing slogan shirts. I bought this foam latex Frankenstein forehead piece from Wuchi. It's not the best piece you're ever going to come across, but you can definitely work with it. I don't practice my looks, so this is the first time I got it out of the packet. I honestly thought it was going to be a non-starter. We sat there for 5 minutes, umming and ahhing as to whether to even give it a go, but I'm really pleased I did. Once I made the hair and stuff work, I was really happy with how it came out. So I'm just going over Billy's skin with some witch hazel to remove any oils, and then I'm going to apply some Prozaid cream. This is from the Makeup Armory. I'm going to apply this to Billy's forehead as well as his eyebrows and just underneath onto the actual eyelid itself. Not going too far because we don't want his lids to stick together, just anywhere that the brow piece is going to sit. I'm also going to take this onto the wig cap itself. This is going to help the wig cap from slipping off because the prosthetic will stick to both the skin and the cap. When you're a girl and you've got long hair, you can actually pin the wig cap in place, but when you've got short hair like Billy, it's harder to keep that from sliding backwards. I'm also taking some of that Prozaid cream and applying it to the actual foam latex piece, and then I'm just going to wait for both of those to go completely see-through, as that means they're no longer wet, so they're tacky and ready to be stuck down to the skin to form a completely watertight seal. So before I press it down into place, I'm making sure that the centre of the brow piece matches with the centre of Billy's face, and that also both the pieces cover his natural eyebrows, because we want that to kind of adhere to his eyelid so you don't see any of his brows. Once you're happy, you can then firmly press that into place. To make sure that the head had balance with the bottom half of the face, I also purchased this Rubberware square jaw. If you're not confident with applying the glue and the piece straight away, you can offer it up to the skin and apply a powder around the outer edge so you've got a guide as to where the piece is going to be sitting. This is a method that I've used in previous videos, so feel free to check those out if you're unsure on that particular technique. Much like the brow piece, I applied some of the Prozaid cream to the skin and the back of the piece, allowed those to go completely translucent, and now I'm pressing those into place. You want to make sure that you don't get any folds in the foam latex. If there are any small areas that need readjusting, just apply a small amount of IPA to a brush, work that over the area. It will reactivate the glue so you can just maneuver the piece a little bit, and then it will stick back down once the IPA evaporates. I only applied glue to one half of the piece, and as you can see, I'm now applying it to the second half because I don't want glue over the entire piece to begin with in case it sticks to itself or sticks to another area of Billy's face that I don't want it to. And as you can see, it gives him a bit more of a Popeye kind of feel to his jaw. Now with foam latex, you don't get very thin edges, especially if you're buying cheap pieces. So you need to use a ridge filler of some kind just to kind of bridge the gap between the foam latex and the skin. I'm just going in with a small amount of the cream Prozaid on my metal spatula, and I'm just using this to fill in that area. It's not going to be perfect, but it doesn't matter too much because once we've painted it, those seams will become invisible. I decided to purchase an additional piece because the forehead piece from Wuchi didn't come with the classic staple marks across the top of the forehead. So this one is a gelatin piece. So again, I'm using some Prozaid to stick this down. The great thing about it being gelatin is that it is slightly stretchy. This piece has been moulded in a S shape. The fact that it is stretchy means I can manipulate it and pull it around so that it fits exactly across the top of the forehead in more of a straight line. There is some flashing on the edge of the gelatin piece, which is great because it means it's super thin and can be blended away into the skin so that you can't see the edges. Where they are so thin, that does sometimes mean that they will fold in on themselves and stick to itself. So if that does happen, again, just use some IPA to lift that up and re-stick it. Then I'm using a cotton bud dipped in some witch hazel, and I'm using a rolling motion to blend away those edges. This is one of my favourite accessories over Halloween. This is my crystal head sculpt from the Makeup Armory, and you can use this to store your brush cleaner in, acetone, IPA. I'll also use it for Pro Clean when I'm taking Billy's makeup off, so I can just dip my brush in and then work that over Billy's face to remove the prosthetics. Here I put in some liquid Prozaid, and I'm using a sponge and I'm working that over all the foam latex to seal it. Foam latex is like a sponge, so if you paint directly on top of it, it will just absorb the colour. So you can either use Pax paints, which does contain Prosade and it works as a sealant at the same time as painting it, or you can do what I'm doing and seal it first and then go in with a grease paint or a cream foundation. You then want to dry it with a hairdryer until it goes translucent, and then you can go in with some translucent powder and set it all in place so that you take away that tackiness. I've also applied that Prosade underneath the brow piece towards the eyelid, so make sure you really get underneath there with the powder so you take away all that tacky residue so that when you or your model opens your eyes, the lid doesn't stick to the brow piece. Once you've finished going over with the powder, dust off any of the excess product before you go in and paint. The powder I'm using is the No Colour Powder by RCMA. Again, you can get this at the Makeup Armoury and I will link everything in the description bar for you. Next, I want to build up some silicone pockets just for the bolts to sit into. These are some plastic bolts that we got from Amazon. They are specifically for a Frankenstein look. They came on a wire that you just sort of wore in a U shape around your neck. They were really pants, so we cut them off and then we painted them just to make them look a little bit more aged. So I've drawn on roughly where I want them to sit, and now I'm going to take some Sculpt Gel in the Flesh Tone, which again I got from the Makeup Armoury. I'm mixing together A, B and C because we are applying this to the neck and the neck does have a little bit of movement. We want the silicone to be a little bit softer, so adding part C to the silicone creates more flexibility. I'm using a metal spatula to apply this to the skin following the guide that I've drawn on with a pencil. And at first you kind of just want to get the shape down. It is quite soft when you first mix the silicones together, and as they start to harden it holds its shape a little better, but you don't have a lot of working time with it once it starts to go off. I'm using my spatula at a bit of a 45-degree angle, so again we've got a nice smooth finish between the silicone and the skin like we did with the ridge filler around the foam latex. And then just before it goes off, I'm lifting the very centre to make the skin look like it's kind of torn a little bit where the bolts are sitting. I've used this method for a devil tutorial, so if you want to see that I will link it on screen for you now. Now we're going to move on to colour. I'm taking this Ben Nye cream foundation in the shade Frankenstein, which I also got from the Makeup Armoury. And this is going to be our base colour. It's the first colour we lay down and we're going to apply it over the entire face, including the prosthetics. What's great about working with a cream based foundation is that you can sheer it out, or you can really build up the opacity with a stipple motion. You'll find with a cream based product that over silicone it does tend to kind of glide on, and then if you rub it too much it'll glide back off, so use a stipple motion over that to build up the colour. And then when you're finished you can use a fixing spray or you can use a setting powder to make sure it doesn't move. You'll see here I'm using a stipple motion to pack that onto the foam latex because as you can see it is textured. So you can use the tip of the bristles to get into that texture and the belly of the brush to really lay down the colour. You can see there's not a massive colour difference between the foam latex and the skin, but there is a little bit. So this is our base colour and then we're going to work over the top of this so everything really starts to match. You can also see because there are quite thick edges around the eyes, they are quite visible at the moment. We're going to paint it in a way that it becomes less visible. I wanted to add some punch to the actual colouring, so we're going to apply a second layer, and this is a face paint. This is by Superstar and I'm going to list the actual colour number in the description for you. Now you wouldn't want to apply this down as your first layer, it would be too vibrant. It also wouldn't be the same colour payoff on the foam latex and the skin. So that's why we're layering down the cream colour first, then we're going in with this vibrant shade, and then we're going to go back in with the Frankenstein colour and we're going to stipple that on so we get an uneven skin texture. Also, having a layer of the face paint over the cream stops the cream from moving, so sandwiching these products together really creates amazing longevity. So it's up to you if you want to go for the vibrant green or if you want to go for more of a muted dead green. It's completely up to you. I want a mottled appearance, so having both there is the ideal colour for me. So now I'm going back in with the same brush that I used to lay down the cream foundation to begin with, and instead of going for that full coverage, I'm creating a mottled finish using a stipple motion and the belly of the brush. You can see now that we're layering these shades that the foam latex doesn't look like a different colour to the skin. So what once looked a bit higgledy-piggledy with the colour of the jaw and the headpiece, and you can't really see how it's going to come together, now you can see it is coming together. Now I'm going to really emphasise the mottled appearance to the skin, and to do that I'm going to take my Toby Sells Post-Mortem palette and mix together a range of the green and the black, and then I'm also going to go in with the more rusty tones. So I'm taking a stiff brush dipped into some IPA so we get a really light wash of colour first, and I'm going to go over the face, spackling that on until we really start to break up the skin tone. If, like me, you've got your nails done for holiday and you don't want to get the alcohol activate paints all in your nails, you can wear gloves like I've done. Going back to my Toby Sells palette, I'm going in with the Dead Blood shade, and on a small brush I'm applying 2 layers of that between the staple marks, and this just gives that dead blood appearance, as if this is a wound that isn't completely fresh. I'm also adding a very small amount around the end of the staples. It's so effective, and you wouldn't even know that this was a separate piece to the forehead. For the actual staples, I want them to look as realistic as possible, so I'm taking this Mayron metallic powder, and once you mix it with a mixing medium or some water, you'll get a chrome finish. And it's so good that when your model or yourself turns and it catches the light, it genuinely looks like metal. This was the part I was most looking forward to. It was the most satisfying part, and it really looked like it wasn't makeup, so that was why it's one of my favourite parts to do. Now I'm going back in with a mix of the rust colour and the dead blood, and I'm using a very light wash, so the ratio of IPA to paint is a lot higher so that we only get a very soft colour. And I'm painting this a bit lower and a bit higher than the actual wound itself. This is just so that area looks a bit sore and a bit more realistic. Now I want to emphasise the contours of the face, and instead of going too dark with it, instead I want to apply a bit more of a rusty shade, again just to emphasise the kind of dead blood appearance to the skin so that it's no longer human and is more monster. And what's really important with this step is about going light with your layers. Really build up the colour till you're happy with it. Don't go too heavy to begin with, because it's always easier to add than it is to take away. So stipple your colours on, use your fingers to soften the colour, and then just do it in light washes. I'm adding a darker wash of colour to where the seams of the foam latex sits on the skin, so it looks more like a shadow rather than a separation. I'm using a brush with dual fibres because this allows you to kind of paint a nice light wash. It doesn't add too much product to the skin. If you use bristles that are too dense, you apply too much colour. We've not applied any prosthetics around the eye, so we want to use paintwork just to emphasise the shadows. And I'm taking the time to kind of add in some creases around the eyes as if they're sunken and it's a slightly older person. It isn't somebody who's fresh and young. The eyes need to make the skin look tired and as though they've not slept forever. And as this is more of a theatrical look, I'm going to use more theatrical lines in order to shape the face. So we're creating a bit more of a sunken look to the cheeks, but we don't want to do it with eyeshadow. We want to do it with brushstroke marks and patting down the product to create a bit more of a shadowed appearance, because we want it to still look mottled. If you want it to look more soft, then you can use eyeshadows, but this is my preference for this specific look. So I'm doing all of my shading first, then I'm going to go in with highlight and then add a tiny bit more shading. I'm taking some of that dead blood colour and adding that around the skin on the bolts as if it previously bled, and that's the colour that's been left over. I'm also adding a very small amount to the inner section of the top lip and the bottom lip. I want to emphasise the shape of the chin, and I'm going to do that by again adding some rusty coloured shadows. How far you go is completely up to you. I like to emphasise the cleft in the chin and also the roundness around it, and adding a little bit of the shading over the lines really helps to disguise the seam of the chin piece. If you look to the left of the screen now, you can see that I'm using a picture of Frankenstein as my reference. This is more just for the placement of the shadows on the face. That particular makeup look that I was using as my reference image contained a lot of facial prosthetic work, whereas we're just using a brow piece and a chin piece. For example, they used actual lid pieces, whereas I'm not going to apply any lid pieces. Instead, I've used a flat colour on the eyelids to make them look bigger. I'm now adding a highlight of the green shade in between the dark line work to make it look like we've got ridges on the skin, so they look more like genuine wrinkles. Again, still theatrical, but much more lifelike. You mustn't forget to also paint your ears because they will be on show underneath your wig. So I'm going back in with a small amount of darker shading. I'm taking the mix of the green, the rusty brown shade, dead blood, and a very small amount of black, and I'm just emphasising some of the wrinkles on the forehead. I'm also bringing it down ever so slightly at the very front just to emphasise the shape of the actual brow. I'm adding a final wash of Rusty shade around the nose and mouth area, and then I'm going to apply a wig. I bought a really cheap one off of eBay. It is a short style and I was hoping it would be good enough, but it's still not. It is definitely still too thick. However, you could make it work. I've decided instead to cut the wig apart and apply it in layers like I have been doing with my previous tutorials to get the shape and thickness that I want. As I explained in my previous Joker tutorial, if you get into the base of the wig, you'll find that the hair has been applied and sewn in strips, and if you take the strips apart, you can then use them to create the hairstyle that you want. So I'm going to layer this round using 3 or 4 strips to create the shape, because we don't want a thick head of hair, we want it to be quite thin, especially when it comes down the forehead. So you want to apply it quite far back, but far enough forward that it covers the seam of the forehead piece, and also so that it just kind of peeks over the top so that you can still see the scar and the staples. Once I started getting it on, I couldn't stop laughing at Bill. I thought it was so funny. I had to compose myself before I could continue. To set the hair in place, I'm applying a small amount of the Got2b Glued hairspray, and then using a comb, I'm combing it forward so that the hair is a little bit more even. Then I'm taking 2 smaller sections and I'm applying those underneath the fringe on the outer edges to cover up the side of the forehead, but also the visible areas of Bill's natural hair and where the wig cap is sitting. And I'm just using bobby pins to pin this all in place. This is so much more of a fitting wig than the wig I actually purchased itself, so it's definitely worth sort of having a play around yourself to see if you can come up with something better than a standard wig. So when I first got that forehead piece, it wasn't wider than Bill's head and I couldn't understand how it was going to make his head look so big like Frankenstein monster's head. But obviously the idea is that it does sink in at the sides, so it is really important that you cover those edges with the wig, and that's where it's going to look super authentic. Going back to my bolts, I'm now going to put them into the pockets that were created on the neck. If you find you've made your circles too big, apply a little bit of spirit gum to the base of your bolts and have them stick in a little bit more securely.
I like walks on the beach, being zapped with electricity, ice cream.
And that completes my Frankenstein's monster makeup tutorial. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you go as this at Halloween, please tag me in your photos. To see more